Hello, my name is Jeremy Elder. I'm a staff product designer on the Foundations team, and I'd like to walk through an effort that we're doing today. You can see I'm on a component page in Pajamas. We are working on updating component pages to use a new content template. In a previous effort, we updated that template, and let me just find that document really quick here. Perfect. So under Pajamas, Design System, Files, we have our Pages, Components, Template. And what we did was we took a look at the jobs to be done. We updated a component template for all the documentation content for a component, created a markdown template file with notes, etc., examples, everything in there you'd need to update a component. And in this epic, you can see that all of the components are listed. Several have been completed. So for future reference, you can see what the changes have been in those and leverage them. And what I want to do is walk through my process for updating a component page to use the new template. So I'm going to start with the date picker, which under 14.3, it's one that we're wrapping up. So date picker, update docs to utilize new template. So that's why I'm choosing that one. There is no other reason other than it's scheduled to be done. So it's not like this is an easy one, a hard one. It's just, it is what it is. It needs to get updated. So first thing I do is simply just I open up that issue, take a look at the background and the links. You can refer to the parent epic and the proposal. I like to take a look at the current state of things. So if I'm looking at date picker in Pajamas, I can see there's a description. We have our implementation tab. We have our contribute. Everything we're doing here is specific to the usage tab. You can see as this is today, we have a usage section. We have examples kind of interspersed, and we have a design specs link. So pretty simple, pretty light. What we're doing with the template is updating this so that there's a little more granularity into component usage. And so let me find that template again. I'll just read through a few of these things here. We're updating this to use more simple language and to be more concise, using singular instead of plural. So instead of saying buttons do this, we'll say a button does this. We'll use singular when referencing a user. So a user will do this versus users may do this. The reason for that is that it just dials it in to a single user experience, allows us to focus on that. We are also removing all comments and extra space. After this is added with the template, we're adding static visuals to support the concept. We're trying to keep those as simplified as possible. And I'll show an example of that in a minute. And remaining with the current process, adding a to-do for content that isn't there or it's set up for future completion. And let's see here. I might just walk through the template really quick. There is some front matter. If you're not familiar with Markdown, it's content at the top that usually is used in templating and other ways to populate different content, do different functions. The only thing that you really have to worry about for this is something new, is a description. And it is just a 1 to 2 sentence description of the component. It's very short, very quick. It shows above the tabs on the component page, so that way, regardless of the tab you view, the description is there. I'll let you work through these extra items that are in the front matter on its own. I'll just jump into the main parts of the content that are visible. The first is examples. We're front-loading this with examples. One of the comments brought up by a team member was that we're burying the lead, and by that we mean that the visual or understanding what the component is really hard to find. It's buried. It's either you scroll for it or you got to dig to figure it out. What we really want to do is bring those examples that exist, live code examples, and pull those to the top. Within that section, we also link to the design and the Pajamas UI kit if it exists, and that way there's an immediate visual reference. Next up is the structure. So based on the live example and the work in the UI kit, we're providing a figure element with an image in it that is kind of a diagram of the component. It's numbered, and based on that numbering, we unpack all of the different elements that are part of that component. So let's go over here to alert, for example. So here you see we have our examples. We have a link to Pajamas UI Kit. Then we have structure. So under structure, we have this simplified wireframe-like visual here that's numbered. Within the numbering, below, we explain what each item is. So this way it's both visual and in text. This is just identifying the structure of that. So as you look at this, we name the parts. That way if things are referenced later on, you'll understand what is being referenced. And then we go into the guidelines, and those start with when to use, when not to use. And those are really helpful. Some of the content or component pages prior to this effort had a when to use, when not to use. Some didn't. When they were present, it was inconsistent. And so this makes it all consistent. It means that every single component will have when to use, when not to use. And when not to use will be focused on what to use instead. So maybe instead of an alert, you need to use a broadcast message or a toast, whatever it might be. So we're trying to be specific, also be more positive in this. Instead of do's and do nots, it's more of when to use it, when to consider something else. Next up is variance, or if there aren't any variance, appearance. And if there's neither, then this section doesn't appear. So this is where you list out the different variants. So back to the alert example, we have variant, danger, warning, success, etc. And we have the content for each of those. Next is the behavior. So just a bulleted list of items that describe the behavior. So an example here is permanently dismissible only when the alert relates to a user's individual instance and wasn't triggered by a system condition. So this is obviously pulled from alerts, but we just have those examples in there so that we know and understand, help communicate the behavior. We don't have to get too specific with variables or things that might be more apparent for front end if you're digging into the implementation side of things. But this is like general use. When you click this, you should expect this kind of thing. Next up is content. So many of the components have nested content, whether that be titles or body content or embedded actions. This is the place where we can explain and document all of those. Next up is accessibility. And then that's just general accessibility notes. If there are things that are specific to front end, those can be handled in the actual component itself in the implementation. But this is more of a general usage and content kind of placeholder if certain things aren't built out quite yet in GitLab UI. And lastly, it's a new section that I hope will be helpful, and that is reference. And this is optional, but it's a place to provide anecdotal comments or key decisions that are related to the component. And so, for example, we recently, in the last several months, had an effort where we updated buttons, and now there's limited variants where we removed, like success and warning variants. This would be a great place to reference those decisions, why those decisions were made, or other, link to other research or other related items that might not fall cleanly under another category. So that's a really high-level view of the template. I encourage you to just scan through it, read through it. It's pretty lightweight, pretty quick read, so pretty easy to do. So from there, what I'd like to do is just jump into this this issue for this, once again, under that parent epic where these are listed. I'll go ahead and assign myself. I'm going to create a merge request. All right, so merge request is created. First thing I like to do is just jump in here and edit this right away. With conventional commits, having a title that is matches that is helpful. So right away, I'm just gonna come in here and do feature. We're going to do, let's do this format here. Just cleaning this up. content to utilize new template. I'll leave this closes here. So in the description, since a few of these have already been done, what I like to do is just jump over to the existing ones and copy some of the content that's in there. What I've been doing is just a quick statement that says, hey, this updates the card component or whatever component it might be to use the new template, have before and after screenshots, and then that line about what issue it closes. So if I'm over here, excuse me, I'll go ahead and go to one of these existing ones. I'm just going to copy that content, paste it in here. This is not the card, right? This is the date picker. So I will then update that link. And I'm going to add a before and after table. I use A-Text, which is an application that has where I can do shortcuts and stuff. So I'm just going to type in my markdown table before after. Really quick way to do that. You can see I have these marked out. For now, the after is just going to be placeholder. So I put in ellipse or ellipsis or something like that to capture that. And my next step is to jump over to the actual component page itself. And I'll do a screenshot of the entire content and put this in there. I like to use the application. I'll have to add it to the notes here, but I think it's Screenshot Pro, and that's actually running right now for this recording, so I can't do a screenshot while I'm doing that. But I use that, and there's an option in there to capture like a scrolling window, so I can capture what I need for the date picker, and I place that in the before column. For now, I'm just going to wrap this up and hit Save Changes. Okay, so I have gone ahead and added the before image of the date picker. So as you can see, I did a scrolling capture, captured all the content that I need to prepare for that. Next thing I do is just to check out the branch. I prefer to work on this locally. So I'll jump over into my terminal app here. I turn and paste the content. All right, so now I'm in that branch locally. I'm gonna run yarn start to get the local environment running. Open that up. While that loads, what I will do is open up the project in my IDE, in this case VS Code. Open up date picker. I can see that that is accurate. All right, so this is up and running. We go to components and date picker. Now, since I'm updating the content template, what I've done is to speed up my own time, since I'm familiar with the template, but also just to make it easier to code, I've taken the content that I need to change and update in the new template and that structure, and I've shortened it into just a snippet that I use with, again, with A-Text. So if I'm in here, I go to, let me find it here, Pajamas component. I've shortened it just to this quick content. And so what I end up doing is I'll go into my IDE. I'm going to just create a bunch of space between the current content. I'll even throw a little horizontal rule in there. And I'll come back up here and I will do temp component. What is that? Oh, what is it? Let's see, this is where I got to figure out what I'm doing here. This is not one that I have memorized yet. So comp template, there we go. That's just the shortcut I use. All right, so now it's unpacked it's expanded the template for me. So I know what content, or, you know, the general format I need to use. From here, what I like to do is go through all of the existing content and just start to move it up into these different sections. I know under examples is where I need to reference the actual examples. So I will go through the content and find all the examples. I'll cut that out. Looks like that might be the last one. Paste that back up in here. The Pajamas UI kit link, I noticed that there is one for that. So I will just copy that link, drop it up here, and as I'm moving content up, I make sure that I remove it from the section below. I don't need to have this extra paragraph for design specs anymore, so I'm just going to remove that. And I'll continue working through this process, including updating the description and whatnot. And the description, oftentimes existing today, is under usage, just in longer form. And so what I like to do is just take a look at what is here and simply move it up here into the description. Just read through this one quick. Probably clean it up and say the date picker allows a user, so this is where we get into the singular, to choose, say, and or, since it is optional, input a date. So this says input a date through by manually, which doesn't really make sense. So we're just going to clean that up. The date picker allows a user to choose and or input a date say by manually typing the date into the input field or by using a calendar-like dropdown. Since we have choose here first and then input a date, I'm just going to reverse the order of the second half of the sentence. So the user can choose and or input a date by using a calendar-like dropdown. Or by typing the date into the input field. And we don't need to put by manually, because if you're typing, that's pretty clear. One of the things with the template we can do is remove docs in Figma. I'm going to do that. This one, I'll go ahead and save it. If I jump back over into the browser, just wait a second here. You can see this is updating. Time to time, I'll jump back over into the browser and just view the live preview. Make sure everything is still working, haven't broken anything. Let's go ahead and give this a refresh here. Okay, so I can see that the content is updated. Now under examples, I have the options. Test out the View in Pajamas UI kit link. Okay, so that goes to card, which is obviously incorrect. So I'm going to go to date picker, hit share, I'm going to copy link, jump back over, paste that, and save that. All right, so that's covering the top half of this. Next, I'm going to work through all this content below and move it up as needed. All right, so this is a part that gets fairly nuanced and it might be a little tedious to watch, so feel free to speed up this section. But what I'm going to do, like I mentioned, is just go through all of this existing content and start to move it up in these other sections and populate it. And so let's just do that. A lot of this can actually be, I'm assuming, removed. So usage, okay, we see the date picker comes in two parts. The input field date picker dropdown. This is starting to sound a lot like structure. So I've got that in the back of my mind. It talks about what the input field must be to indicate the format, the content, etc. That sounds more like a content piece. The user should be able to input the date by either typing it in or choosing a day from the date picker dropdown. That sounds kind of like behavior. So I'm just gonna go ahead and move this up here for now. I'll go ahead and move some of these other sections. Alright, so now when using the input field, users are able to enter a date in different formats. Alright, so this one seems like it could either be content or behavior. I'm going to put this under behavior, and the reason for that is because this is user entered content. This isn't content that comes baked into the component. It's how the component is responding when a user does something with it. So I'm going to do that. I'm just going to clean this up, continue to remove sections. All right, so a combination of the two date pickers can be used for selecting a range of dates. And how can the user do so? By selecting a start and end date. When implementing a range, the following guidelines should be followed. All right, so there's some guidelines that follow about implementing a range. So the order of the from and to date inputs should match the user's reading direction or setting. So, okay, so left to right or right to left for different language types. On mobile, the inputs are full width and stacked. So the reading order doesn't change. That's some interesting notes. And then once the user selects the starting date, the date picker for the end date should only allow them to pick a date that is either equal to or after that. Makes sense. The days preceding the start should be disabled and not selectable. It's kind of a different note. And the default month shown in the date picker dropdown should be the current month. All right, so I'm going to select this block here. I think that fits under content. It is the content that this component is starting with. Reading order, this is talking about the order of the fields. So that to me is also talking about the content because it's referring to those labels that exist there. So I'm going to put this under content as well. All right. So I think that there are variants here. There is just a date picker and there's a date range picker. So I'm going to remove this content. I'm going to put it up under this variant section for now. And I'm just going to add a note to myself here that I'm going to have. Actually, we're going to do a bulleted list. We're going to do, just do date picker. Go ahead and just duplicate that. Let's do date range picker for now. Just placeholders so that I can keep in mind that there's multiple sections here, or multiple variants, sorry. All right, so selecting a range of dates. This is, once again, behavior, what happens after a user interacts with it. Place that up here. See, I've started to whittle this down quite a bit. Let's see, when the date range has a limit on the number of selectable days, indicate that in the UI with text. All right, so this seems more like a content piece. So for now, I'm going to put this up in content. And then lastly, there's the to-do to add an example. And so I'm going to move that to do up into my examples. All right, so nothing has been added under accessibility, nothing under reference. At the moment, I'm just going to leave those in particular. Well, I'm going to remove reference right now because none of the content had a reference-like aspect to it. I'm going to leave accessibility in case as I work through this, there's items that I want to mention or bring up at the moment. If not, it's a good idea for me actually just to do this now. To do add accessibility notes, and that way if I don't add anything, it's still there so that we're aware that there should be something that communicates some aspect of accessibility. So now that I have this content in place, I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and save. Okay, so I've gone through a few steps here. The next, now that I move content into areas of the template, I'm just going to work top to bottom and start to refine that content and add elements that I know are missing. So we've worked through the front matter here. I know that that's in a good place. Examples I feel pretty good about. There's 2 examples. There's a to-do to add an additional one, the link to view in the UI kit. So structure is where I'm going to start at the moment. And first up, I know that I need a visual in here. So for now, I'm going to just, what I can do is either copy and paste from the template. Let's see here. Yeah, we'll do that. And I'll paste that in here. And with that, I know that I'm going to be adding this image, and these are set up so that you really only have to change a few terms. So I'm working with date picker here. So I'm going to go through and just update the instances of this. The figure, the ARIA label is date picker structure. The image, I'm just going to end up calling this date picker structure. And then the alt for that image, numbered diagram of a date picker structure. I'm going to leave this little note here about the 2 parts. So what I really want to focus on is the different elements within the component itself. And so just in here, I generally just create some placeholder. I know I need some bold content. This is the formatting, it's numbered. The item, the element itself is bold. There's a colon and then the explanation of it. So I'm just going to dupe this a few times, duplicate that just so I have that placeholder. And what I like to do is open up the actual design spec if available. So I'm going to do that in the component library, the date picker, and just take a look at what exists. And there's obviously a base calendar here, there's date elements. What I want to focus on is the rendered result, and sometimes that'll contain content, sometimes it won't. You'll have to use your discretion on what you show. In this instance, since we have both we have multiple variants, we have this that gets expanded to this and this that gets expanded to this. I might choose to use both of these. And there's a Pajamas visual examples document in Figma that has many of these already today. So I'll start to think through how that'll look. There's avatar and badge. There's one for the banner. So you can get a sense of this kind of wireframe pattern that's happening here. We have that for broadcasts and breadcrumbs and file uploaders, which is one of the more complex ones. And so I'll do similar with the date picker itself. I'll take that piece out of the video and come back and show that in a while here. But first off, I can go ahead and just look at that and say, okay, I've got a label, an input, and the actual button that triggers the visible calendar. So let's go ahead and list these items out. I'm just going to say label. We have the input. We have the calendar button. Here we're going to have a clear button. The reason I'm not just saying calendar icon or clear icon is because I do want to indicate that it is a functional element, what it is. So next up, we'll refer to the calendar itself. On this one, as I'm thinking through this, I'm not sure how granular I want to get just yet with identifying every little attribute in here. And likewise, if I look over at the date picker that is the the date range, it has all of the same elements. So I don't feel the need to create multiple versions of this as a visual example, like not one for a single date picker and one for a date range picker. And the reason for that is I'm just identifying the parts, and the parts are the same between both. So I'm only going to do that once. So from here, what I would do is just remove any of the extra ones I have and start to identify what the purpose is of each of these. You don't have to, if it's content related, you don't have to expound on all the different properties of that content. This is really just identifying what it is. So if I look at, let's see here. Let's look at breadcrumb, for example. Under structure, there's the avatar, which is optional. And I just say prefixes a group or project link, or the link opens the page to the same window. So very simple, very concise. And so with the date picker, we know a label would, text content to identify the input. And this would be like a text field to populate a selected date. Calendar button opens the calendar pop-up. Clear button removes. We can just actually say, yeah. Well, let's just say clears the input content. Calendar pop-up showing the month. I can refine these further, but initially this gives me the parts. If I look at the content I had in there previously, the date picker comes in two parts, input field and the date picker. Well, we know that there's more than that, so I'm going to remove that, get rid of any spaces. And like I mentioned, I will refine the structure later with also with that visual. If I were to look at this now, you can see it's still rendering here. Give it a refresh. All right, you can see that obviously the visual doesn't exist yet, so it's not going to render anything. And then I have the list of content. So far looking pretty good. Next up, guidelines, when to use, when not to use. Now, there wasn't actually any content under these. I think I alluded to that in the beginning, that there was no when to use or when not to use. So as I think through this, like what is the purpose? When to use. Choose a date a date from a calendar. Populate, I can spell right, text input. So it's pretty straightforward. And I could add another bullet about the range, etc. Refine this a little further. When not to use, we can think through some other component. I will, admittedly, on the fly, I can't think of anything at the moment that would conflict with this, but I will figure out something, because I'm sure that there's alternatives or alternative situations, etc. So and then the variants, date picker, date range picker. So the date picker would be choose a single date. Date range picker, choose a start and end date. And the rest of this is pretty redundant. Get rid of that. We don't have any additional variable sections, so if there was something about alignment or statefulness, etc., I could populate that there. I'm going to put this here so I can return to it. Behavior, I've got a few items here. I'm just going to convert them all into bullets. Type in the spot. I have a clean list of items. Behavior, the user should be able to input the date by either typing it in or choosing a day from the date picker dropdown. All right, so some of this can be cleaned up a little bit. So the user, remove the should be able to. I'm just going to say can. User can input the date by either typing, doesn't have to say it, but by either typing in the text field or by choosing a day from the calendar pop-up. I think that's a little easier to understand. In this last part, the user must never be forced to use only one of the two input methods. I think the fact that we lead off by saying the user can input the date by either, we already allude to the fact that there's a choice there, and we don't provide an opt-out where you can set it to one or the other. And so I think that this is unnecessary, so I'm going to clean that up and remove that. So now we just have the user can input the date by either typing in the text field or by choosing a day from the calendar pop-up. I should clarify which will populate the text field with the chosen date, just for clarity. Now, if I'm saying down here, I'm saying, yeah, the user can input the date. That might get a bit confusing because we call it the input. So I'm gonna just clean this up even further. So let's say the user can either type a date into the input, so that way I'm tying this terminology back to what's in the structure, or by choosing a day from the calendar pop-up. Go ahead and add this too. Which will populate the input with the chosen date. So that's kind of how I go about simplifying, cleaning things up. I'm going to do that for the rest of this, and then jump back in just a few moments. Okay, so we're back. I've done some updates. Okay, I'll start at the top, work my way through this just to explain a few of the points here. I updated the description to be a little cleaner, and also referring to the input as a text field. That way I'm not confusing it with a term input that could be either a noun or a verb. And so I've also updated that in structure. So label is the text associated with the text field. Text field, it's the input that gets populated with a date. So I guess I could change this to be consistent. Let's actually do this. Let's do input element. We're alluding more to the HTML side of things. All right, so the calendar button opens the calendar drop down. Calling it a drop down, not a pop-up. It's been consistent with what was there previously. The clear button clears the text field content. So once again, I'm referencing this text field all throughout. I added a to-do to update the structure with the date range limit indicator. You note that there's a to-do to add that example here. It is also not part of the design spec, and so I think that we can clarify that that needs to be updated so somebody doesn't look at the structure and think, well, where is that? What is that? When to use for choosing a date to populate a text field. When not to use. This one I mentioned earlier that it was a bit of a challenge off the top of my mind. When not to use. Did a little research, digging around. And the one reason I found, without getting too abstract, is that if a user needs to enter a familiar date, like a birthday, consider using just a regular text field without the date picker, which would add a lot of additional overhead and functionality when you could simply say, enter your birth date, here's the format, etc. So there are two variants. Date picker chooses the single date. Date range picker chooses a start and end date. The behavior has been updated. I won't read through all of this. Suffice it to say that I've made the text more concise, removed points that are redundant or already potentially assumed. Be really careful with the term assumed there, and allow it to be stuff that is for sure clear. Same for content, updated that. Let's just hit save on here again, one last time. Close out any other files. Go back over to the browser where I have my preview running. Should still be running. Let's just go over to the terminal and see here. Okay. Stuff is still happening. There we go. As promised, I added the structure diagram in Figma. What I did was I created a new page for the date picker. I pulled in the necessary elements. I created the rest state and the active state. Very simplified wireframey version, not getting too detailed here. Added the 5 markers. Let's make sure I've got those correct here. 1 is the label. 2 is the text field, which gets populated with the date. 3 is the calendar button. 4 is the clear button. And 5 is the drop down. So all those are labeled. I chose not to be super granular and call it placeholder separate since it is part of that text field. So that's how that populates. Here's the to-do. Here's the guidelines. So I'm going to go back into the terminal. I'm going to just stop the process here. We're going to just do its status. Looks like I have modified the date picker, correct? And I have created a new image file for the structure. That is correct. So I'm just going to add those. And using my conventional commits format, do feature date picker, and then update content to use new template. All right, let everything run, everything's clean locally. We'll go ahead and push up those changes. Our next step will be to go over to the MR, merge request. Just going to refresh that. See, I have a pipeline running. I have the changes added. Now, on some of these, I've gone in and just added comments preliminary before assigning any review, just to notify someone, hey, this is why I've deleted this, is the thinking and the change, etc. In some cases, it's more apparent than others, and so it might be helpful to do so. Up to you. And then lastly, I'll add the after screenshot. Once again, I'm using the same tool to record this video that I would do the screenshot, so I can't do that here. But I would take a screenshot similar to the way I did before, put it up here for after, and then compare the two in place and submit this for review. So that wraps up my workflow for updating the content, the template. Some of the highlights are just using the new template, the new format, going through and making sure that any instance of user is singular, making sure that any mention of the actual component is singular. So here we go, the date picker, not date pickers, etc. And being a little freeform with the content, being able to move it around, not the literal content, but the items that were there before, just to determine what part of that new template they fit best in, and then submit that for review and see how it goes. Make sure it makes sense and that others feel the same. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, please ask questions in the Epic or in the appropriate Slack channel, UX co-working, or the Foundations group channel. And you can also just go ahead and open an MR and pick or assign or ask a question of anyone from the UX Foundations team to help weigh in. We're all working on this. So again, thank you for your time and best of luck updating Pajamas component content.